Oh, come on in. My name is Rick Butz. Welcome to wood carving. Today I'd like to show you how to make an antique old German style Saint Nicklaus. And that's what I'm working on right here. I've taken and bandsawed out a rough shape of this carving, and I'm just roughing it out with the gouges. The first step in doing this design is to outline a couple of lines where the cuffs are going to be on his collar or for his hands. And then it's just a matter of taking some gouges and roughing these out. Now, if you didn't have a bench or some chisels and gouges, you could do this pretty much just with a knife too. But I kind of enjoy using the same tools that these old wood carvers did. Now, I suppose you're probably thinking, well, isn't this a little early to be doing Santas? And the answer is not really. Because up here in the Adirondacks, as soon as I start getting a little sprinkling of snow on the ground, I start thinking about the colder winter days coming up. And it just seems traditional to start making carvings like this. Now I've got the rough profile established there. I'll turn him onto his side and start working on the side. The thing you have to remember with these carvings is just keep working off the angles and the rough edges, and pretty soon you'll have your figure. So when I'm roughing out, mostly all I'm doing is just taking and knocking off the square angles, and pretty soon the form will just start coming through. This is the type of Saint Nicklaus carving that was carved up in the Bavarian mountains and up in Austria and Switzerland. It was one that's done by the people up in the mountains, the farmers, and they could use very simple, straightforward tools for it. And a lot of times, this was the only sort of gift that they could give, was things that they could make with their own hands. And in a way, that's not all bad, because there's a certain sentiment and a value to this type of work. There's something more meaningful in giving a gift that's a work of your own hands. I'll turn around to the other side. I'm using this V-gouge to incise the line here. And this will be where his arms come around the side. And then just taking a very large flat number 2 gouge and just trimming right down. There's a lot of different legends about Saint Nicklaus, and it's always intrigued me how every country and culture seems to have their own variations of the legends. He actually was a historical person. He was a bishop in Asia Minor who, because of deeds of kindness, became the patron saint of students and children. And as time went on, different cultures kind of liked that idea and became a very popular figure. And that's where the tradition of giving gifts to children on the winter solstice came from. Even though I think gift giving on the solstice might date back even earlier than our Christian times. But being the patron saint of children, he was an ideal figure for that. Now we'll do a belt across the back here. What's interesting is several countries also have local saints. For example, in Switzerland, in Germany, there's Bruder Klaus, and who was another Saint Nicholas, who was an actual historical figure in that area. And so it's interesting that they each have their own little different regional ways of celebrating the holidays. In Switzerland, for example, what people do is someone will dress up like Bruder Klaus or Saint Nicklaus. And on Saint Nicholas Day, which is actually December 6th, they will come around to houses and deliver baskets of fruit and berries and so forth and little things like that. Yeah, it seems like kind of a nice tradition. But this idea of gift giving, I believe, goes back many, many years. And that was to celebrate the winter solstice. Now that, as you know, is the turning point of the year. That is when the days start getting longer again. Up until that time, the days have kept getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And then finally, at the solstice is when it kind of turns around and they start becoming longer again. And these people who lived up in the mountains and in the cold regions, that was a big deal. I mean, just knowing that the days were going to be getting a little bit longer made a big difference. Now that I've got this pretty well gouged out, I can start roughing a lot of this out by knife. I know in the Adirondacks it's a big deal. It's very gratifying to know all of a sudden that, even though you can't tell and it's still cold and there's a lot of snow around, that the days are starting to get longer. So that was a good reason for celebration. And I think what fascinates me is that all over the world, people always celebrated this particular day with acts of kindness and gifts and just generally feeling good towards each other. It's a very nice holiday. The thing that is really fascinating about doing a carving like this is after a certain point, you start out with a rough lump of wood, and after a certain point, a figure starts taking form in it. And you just have to have a certain amount of faith and confidence while you're working that something's going to come out of that piece of wood. And I know all these years I've been carving, every time I pick up a piece of wood, it's still the same thing. I'll be carving along, and it doesn't look like much, but you just have to keep believing that something's going to happen with it. And then pretty soon you get to a point, and you can imagine the figure inside the wood. You can actually see it in there in your mind's eye. And then you know that's the turning point, and it's downhill the rest of the way. For doing these feet, you have to be a little careful because these pieces of wood down here, the grain is going up and down this figure. And these are cross grains, so they're very delicate. So you want to be careful not to put too much pressure on them. And what you can do is just take your knife and make a nice little curl up like that to shape those boots. And just keep rounding them off. Now for doing the ruffs, or the cuffs for his hand, just take a large V-gouge, and I'm just going to make a cut about where that ought to be, one on each side. Don't worry about making these real neat and perfect. A little bit of irregularity and off angles really gives it a character of its own. So incise those lines with a V-gouge, and then just trim away the wood around it. Once you get going on these, it's really hard to stop. It's so fascinating. After you have the roughs done and get this detailed out fairly well, you can start working on the face. And I've gone ahead and done a little carving on one over here to show you what that will look like. Now for doing this collar around his head, what I've done is just take my V-gouge and cut around that. And I've also separated the face here by going around and making my cut around there and then carving away the extra. And that gives us room so we can detail the face without hitting that wood on the side. Now for doing the face, which I think is really the magic of it, just start and draw a line about halfway down the head. And you have to imagine the top of his head, halfway between the top of his head and his jaw, which is a little tricky because with this carving, he's got a hood on and he's got a long beard. But about half is a good proportion. And we just notch that down, and that'll be for the eye line. Then for the nose, we make another notch. Now this is basically the same style that we've used on a couple figures before, although there are some variations in this one. But it's a beautifully simple folk style because you can just use the same technique and you get so much expression in the wood. Now that we've got the profiles done here, we can take, and I'm going to use a little more pointed knife here, take and incise a line for the nose. Just incise a line down each way here. And be careful when you're doing that it doesn't get so brittle that nose splits off. You actually see that wood flexing when I do this. Then just take the knife and pare down on each side of the nose. Make a little cut here for the cheek and pare that away. I'll just round that cheek off a little bit. Then I'll come over and do the other side here. I'll just take and pare that down. Remember, take small cuts when you're doing this. And for his cheek here, and come in under there. I just round that off. Now, as I see this, I should take this ruff down just a little bit farther, to this cuff around here, because we're getting close. So once again, I'll take my V-tool and I'll trim that up. These are great carvings because there's so much you can do with them. Just these simple tools and a little time and a piece of wood, and pretty soon you've got a little figure staring back at you. I think that's the real magic of these carvings, is just making the shape and watching a block of wood as you make each one of the individual cuts, and just watching the thing come more and more to life in front of you. It's really like magic. I guess that's why there's always been something magical about wood carving. All over the world, there's people have myths and legends about magical wood carvings and magical people that do wood carvings. There's a story in the Tyrolean Alps, which are now part of Italy, where these wood carvers claim that they learned from a little boy many, many hundreds of years ago who was befriended by the gnomes, and they taught him carving. Okay, I'm going to take and do the eye by taking the point of my knife and incising a little line around there. Now don't make that too deep. That's only about 30/2 of an inch or even less, just a very shallow cut. I'll come under that line and make a little wrinkle around his eye too. Then I turn him around and make a line that goes for the top of the eyelid here, and just take those slow and easy. Remember, don't make them too deep. Then we take our levering cut that we've been using and just slice out a very thin shaving underneath that. Look at that. You can see light through that shaving. Same thing here. Just come under there. And then for the top of the eye, use our paring cut that we've been using and just trim that around like that. Look at that. Very simple style, and yet it gives expression. For doing the pupil of the eye, we use our chip carving technique. I'll take and incise a very small triangle in there, and then just chip that right out. And I'll do the same for the other eye here. Now watch this again here. It's so simple. It's such a simple little technique. It just takes a sharp knife and a little bit of practice. 2 cuts. Coming around the eye there for the top. 3 cuts. Chip out the piece for the pupil there. And there's our face. Now for doing the mustache, we'll give him a nice bushy beard too. Just round this around a little bit. Smooth off the contours. Then take the knife once again in our same pencil grip and bring a line around for the top of the mustache. And bring it around for this side. Then under his nose, we'll just take and scribe a line. And we'll come around here and scribe a line too. Now this is exactly like the technique that we use for the eye. Give him a little lopsided grin there. And just take and pare that slice away. Come around from this side. Pare that slice away. Now trim the beard down a little bit. Now, for doing the mouth, once again, I'll just use the very same technique. Take the pencil grip, cut a lower lip there. Take the knife, slice out that little chip underneath it. Got a little grain hung up there, no problem. And for doing the top part of the lip, the lower lip, I'll make 2 cuts there, and once again, take and just slice out a little chip there. And there we have them. Isn't that fantastic? Such a very simple technique, and yet you can do all sorts of expressions with them. Then it's just a simple matter of going around and trimming up, rounding off the forehead a little, and we'll round off his cheek a little with a little chip there. And so on. Now for doing some of the finer details, this is the downhill point. Everything else after this is just the dessert of the carving. For doing the details, take the V-gouge once again and carve around for the bottom of the ruff, for the lower edge of his coat. And then take another, well, take a smaller V-tool, about a 6mm or so, and by incising very short little strokes here, you can simulate the texture of fur. And just keep making a series of those cuts. And just do that around the coat. And when you paint that, that'll look like fur. Same thing for his cuffs here. Just take and make short little choppy cuts with that V-tool. And so on. And do the same for around the ruff around his head. And that's all there is to it. Our own Saint Nick. Now when you get this done, you'll have something that looks a little bit like this guy over here. And this is all how it would look after you get it all textured. I'd like to show you quickly how you can put a little paint on that guy. Let me clear the decks here. The paint really adds a lot of lifelike flavor to him. Now what's interesting is when I was making one for my little girl, Julie, I asked her what color she'd like it, and she says, well, I want it blue. Well, I thought that was a bit untraditional because I'd only seen him in red. And she even picked out the shade of blue. And I thought, well, okay. Anyway, I had done this blue Santa, and later, during the summer, I had some real nice folks stop by, a nice family from Austria. And they had said, they were so excited to see one in blue because they said, that is the color of the traditional Santa where they're from. So from then on, I started looking around, and not only do they make them in blue, but they make them in green and brown, and red is pretty much the traditional color. I'm going to start with the eyes and eyebrows on this guy first. Let me get another paintbrush. I'll get 2 paintbrushes. You can never have too many paintbrushes. And I'm going to be using a number 1 paintbrush. Oops. Turn this around. There we go. I'm so excited about painting these guys. It's like a holiday. Now for the white, I'm going to use some acrylic. And you know, I'm just going to paint this right out of the tube. I'll put a little on my paintbrush here. And now I'm using acrylic for the white because that dries real fast. If you use an oil paint acrylic, that can take days to dry. I'm just going to paint around there. Let me go to my bigger brush now. And the other nice thing about using the acrylics is when you put the oil color stain over it, which is what I'll be doing in just a minute, the acrylics don't dissolve with that oil, so that you can actually paint right over your acrylics and you'll be in good shape. Now I don't paint the whole thing with acrylics because, well, I don't really like the hard, shiny look of the acrylics. And I like the coat to be kind of a nice, soft look to it. Well, and so on. Rinse the paint out. Let me put the cap on this paint. Don't want that acrylic to dry out. It dries quite quickly. Now, for doing the rest, you know, I'm going to take and wipe that down with a rag, which I just happened to always have to have a rag handy when you're working. See, I can wipe that paint off, and it has soaked into the wood enough that it won't matter. Now, for doing the blue, what I've done is I've mixed some blue oil paints in this saucer with a little bit of paint thinner. And that gives me a very light blue stain. So this will actually go on like a tint. And that's what this technique is called, tinting the wood. And it's like you're staining it with a very light colored stain. And it works out very well because it allows the wood grain to show through the wood. And it gives it a nice, soft effect. This color blue I'm using is cerulean blue. That's a very beautiful color. It seems just right for a figure like this because blue can be kind of a cold color. And in the wintertime, you don't need anything more to remind you of the cold than you can possibly avoid. And this particular shade of blue has a certain warmth to it. It's not a cold, hard color like ultramarine. And so on. Just continue painting and staining that guy. And then, the last thing you want to do is add a little color to his cheeks. Let me find another paintbrush here. I need something a little smaller so I can actually very lightly put on a little bit of color on his cheeks here. To do that, I'm going to use some cadmium red. Now this is delicate because you don't want to overdo this. I'm going to use just the tiniest little smear. And take that and just wipe that on your saucer or a piece of paper until there's almost no paint left on it. And then just take and very lightly dust a little on. The rule of thumb for doing that is use about half as much as you think. A little red there goes a long way. And we can also take and dust a little on his lower lip there. Anyway, that's how you do Saint Nicklaus. Isn't that great? I love it. Now, let me show you another variation that you can do on these carvings. And this is another European-style carving. And this is a little bit different arrangement. This is an old historical one dating back to about, I think, 1870. And that is one that was a style that's found up around Switzerland and up in Austria. Every region has its own. It's a fun project to do, and doesn't take a lot of tools, and it's something that'll give you years of lasting enjoyment. Hey, next week, I'd like to go to something a little bit different and show you how to carve this flying osprey with a fish. Now, this is kind of an elaborate carving, and it'll probably take us a couple of weeks to do it, but it's one that is a lot of fun and a real challenge. So thanks for dropping by, and until next time, this is Rick Butz wishing you happy carving.
How to Carve Wood, a book of projects and techniques by Rick Butz, is available by calling 1-800-950-WMHT. With more than 200 pages and over 400 photographs and illustrations, including patterns for some of the projects in the series, this companion guide presents important woodworking techniques. For your copy, call 1-800-950-WMHT. The cost is $17.95 plus handling. Please have your credit card ready when you call.